Welcome everybody to our track all about Industry 4.0 accelerators. This is all part of our Industry 4 Leaders Summit 2020. And I'm extremely excited to have a number of our guests here today who are really accelerator superstars. I'll start by introducing them by their first name. As we do here in Israel, everything is first name basis in an alphabetical order. So Dan Rodomsky for Centropolis Accelerator from Lawrence Technological University in Michigan. I say hi, Dan, so everybody can see your face.
Hello, thanks for having me today.
Hi, Dan. So the Centropolis Accelerator is a program that helps accelerate and scale small manufacturers and innovators of new hardware physical products. Dan was a consultant or is a consultant to a number of high-tech companies in hardware manufacturing and clean tech accelerators nationwide throughout the US. He has served as a developer of the Build for Scale that educates product developers and companies with hardware-based products on how to scale their business. So thanks, Dan, for joining us today. Next in line, Lila Partridge, Managing Director of Stanley Techstars from Boston, USA. Hi, Lila, how are you this morning?
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. Delighted to be here.
We're very happy to have you with us as well and waking up so early to join us as well as Dan. Lila works in partnership with Stanley Black & Decker in the Stanley Plus Techstars. And the accelerator invests in startups that build artificial intelligence solutions for advanced manufacturing. Apart from that, Lila is an investor with years of experience from Intel Capital's formative years. She's a serial entrepreneur and a Fortune 100 trained executive who enjoys working with fast-growing technology companies. And from my acquaintance with her, she's also fast-paced herself. So she definitely can work with fast-paced startups as well.
Thank you for the compliment.
Shifting to the other side of the globe, joining us from Basque Country is Leire Madariaga from the Basque government, representing Bind 4.0 Accelerator in the Basque Country. She's the Director for Digital Transformation and Entrepreneurship at the Basque government. A great part of her professional experience has been directed towards international relations and foreign trade, and especially those with high technological components. So she definitely knows what we're talking about here. The partners of the Bind 4 Accelerator are industry manufacturers who become customers of the startups in the program. And the startups that complete the program get offered sometimes paid contracts worth up to 150,000 euros. So Leire, thank you for joining us today. It's wonderful to have you here.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Michal. Hello, everybody, and I'm really delighted to share this hour with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And just an hour's drive from where I sit right now in Tel Aviv is Rami Gazit, the Managing Director of the Galilee Accelerator in Carmiel, Israel, which is just up north. He's also the Deal Flow VP of the I4 Valley Industry 4.0 Incubator, which had a session just yesterday as part of our summit. Rami actually has built from scratch university-based acceleration programs such as BizTech in the Technion. He's worked in the past in Amdocs, Elbit, the Israeli Air Force, very large structured organizations, and that collaboration or connection between the startups and these organizations. So he's very, very familiar with these challenges that evolve around connecting these two parts. So
hi,
thank
everyone.
you.
Hi, everyone. Pleased to be here. Delighted to be here. Thank you.
So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll start our conversation now. And I wanted to start with a piece of information, which is actually a study which was done by the UK government about the impact of business accelerators and incubators. This is from October 2019. It's like a lifetime away for most of us. And this research showed that moderately strong evidence from various studies has shown that accelerators can increase the speed at which startups raise investment. They can gain customer traction, grow their number of employees, and reduce the time it takes for them to be acquired. Now, this is a very big statement, true for October 2019, based on a lot of research, But my question to our speakers here today is this true as well? COVID period, we're in 2020, a year past this October date. Dan, what is your experience at the moment? How have accelerators changed to adapt?
Yeah, so the COVID period has been difficult for all of us, obviously, and even for accelerators. Certainly, businesses that are trying to do work business to business has been challenging, right? So never has that been more of a issue than it is for Industry 4.0 technology companies. When you're selling an Industry 4.0 technology, you're basically essentially selling a manufacturing operational efficiency solution, right? So first of all, as you know, a lot of the manufacturing plants worldwide were stalled or not operating at full capacity. And then those that were managing those plants, including a lot of our corporate partners that we partner with in our I4O accelerator here in North America, were so tied up and busy and just trying to get back into working order that they hardly had time for a new technology to pilot or demo it, right? So over the last 9 months in particular, it's been very difficult. We've had more than enough great technology companies from around the world apply for our accelerator, over 200 from 330 different countries, actually. And we had more than enough, we have close to, 40 corporate partners now that are on our team, companies as big as Bosch and Bosch Rexroth and Lear and Whirlpool and Magna and others. And they're very interested to work with these companies. In fact, they're taking meetings still, they're connecting with these companies, they're talking about pilots, but they're working those pilots into their day-to-day operations has been very difficult. And they, in many cases, have been stalled and probably would have happened had it not been for this pandemic.
Thank you, Dan. Rami, what is your experience? How have you adapted to this new reality?
First, of course, we need to realize that this is very different ball game than what used to be just 1 year ago. I think first, what Dan said is correct, but I'm still having some optimism and even increased optimism for the future to come, which is not just behind the corner. Because as I said, the COVID has demonstrated a lot of needs that before the COVID, where someone would have said it might be relevant. We need some resiliency in the supply chain, but it's not so acute. It's not so important right now. Now I think first we are going to get back to normal. It's going to be gradual. It will take time. We see the light at the end of the tunnel, right, with the vaccines, etc. I hope, really hope, that it will be successful in a short timeline. I think first, as an entrepreneur myself, I must be optimistic, and I am. And I think that a lot of industrial companies that were hesitant about innovation and the need to make changes are now more determined, understanding better the need to make the changes and to be open for new innovations coming from startups. So I think this is an opportunity for startups, and because for startups, it's also for accelerators that deal with Industry 4. I don't think that one size fits all, and all startups are the same. Maybe some startups are suffering badly because of it, because of this COVID situation. But Industry 4 and related domains might have some kind of optimistic view for the future, even for the near future, as managers seem to realize the new situation. Now, in our case, specifically in the accelerator, we of course changed things because we cannot conduct business as usual in the COVID time. We started going virtual sessions and the virtual hackathons and all of virtual events, etc. But it was not fully, let's say, virtual. It was a hybrid kind of approach, and I can elaborate later if you want. And I think we can continue with hybrid, and it's going to be, even the way we conduct our sessions, it's not going to be the same like we used to be before the COVID, even after we see the vaccines and when things get back to normal, quote unquote.
Laila, how have you at Stanley Textiles adapted to this kind of new reality?
Absolutely. So I would pull from both comments from Dan and also from Rami. I would say that as we approach the new normal, because we know we've had great news about the vaccines this past week, I think you look at what's the good and bad that comes out of it. And I would say it's mixed on both sides. And I'm generally an optimist, so I'll look at the positive side. Like Dan, I think, when we're in the process of finalizing our 10 companies, and we had, over 300 companies that we talked to, and that's a lot of companies applying. So definitely interest on the startup side. I would also kind of echo a little bit that because you're virtual, a lot of the interactions with corporations in a physical world like the manufacturing floor had to change. And so what I wouldn't say is that things have necessarily slowed down, although it may appear that way for the startups. What I see, in fact, in the background is that someone like Stanley is actually investing more resources, more time, looking at more startups, looking at more innovation, because they have time. But that even there, they're looking at it a little differently. This has to be taking into account the COVID crisis. So you're not testing things in factories where somebody had to show up, because you may have to fly there and then you have to wait 2 weeks before you can go into the factory. And so some of the, the requirements or the pandemic, kind of limitations have made it difficult. On the flip side, I would also say that the positive thing is that startups are able to engage more, and they've talked more because you're not flying as much. Everyone's able to squeeze in a few more meetings virtually because you're sitting in front of a camera like today, as opposed to getting on airplanes all the time. So people are a little bit more accessible. When you are in program, building that cohesiveness amongst the companies, a little harder, right? There's nothing like being in person to really build relationships. So you have to work a little harder on that side. But I would say by and large, it has enabled us as a result to pull more people internationally. So we are very mentor focused, and physically being in the past, we'd want people to fly and meet the companies. Now we're doing it all virtually. We have a broader pool to pull from. So good and bad on both sides. I'm actually optimistic that when we get to the new normal, we'll choose that which is good, and that the work that the companies have been doing in the interim will actually be beneficial for startups going forward.
I completely agree on that startups are flying less and have more time. I think it's the same with the C-level executives as well in these industrial companies who are choosing to stay put, and they have more, and an hour is suddenly a long time, and they have more time to speak to startups. Lede, could you please comment on that as well? In Basque Country, a lot of your the corporates that support your accelerator, some of them are more local, more European corporates. And what do you see in Bind 4.0? Has the accelerator adapted to this new reality? Have you had to make changes in order to help these local corporates?
Difficult not to agree with what Dan, Rami, and Laila and you, Michal, have said. So I agree with everything. But let me share our experience in these months, because as you have just mentioned, we were also, when everything started in March, we were also very afraid how this could imply, or how could this affect, and if this could imply a decrease on the interest that corporates and even startups could have on the program. And it is true that perhaps the first couple of months, 2 or 3 months, we suffered a certain paralysis. But after all these 10, 11 months and looking to the future, we have a more optimistic view, and our experience has been quite positive. On the one hand, and you have just mentioned, we have had to adapt ourselves in terms of management and functioning of the accelerator, of the program of Bind 4.0. It's a program based a lot on networking and on showing the potential of the Basque industrial ecosystem and of the Basque industrial companies and manufacturers. So given the circumstances, this issue of networking has definitely decreased, because yes, of course, we have organized many virtual things, but it's not the same as making visits and making people get together, no? But on the other hand, This has obliged us to be more flexible, to be more adaptable. That is what we also say that the startups have to be. So we have suffered that on our own bodies, and we have to adapt our processes. And as you have just said, we have discovered that many tasks could be developed online. And this has also meant an opportunity for us. You have just mentioned how people are flying less, people are more at home, virtual in cameras, but this means also that we are all more accessible. Perhaps when we wanted to invite a startup, or when we wanted to invite a mentor to the Basque Country, it was more difficult to put that in their agendas. This meant flying, this meant time, dedication, resources. Now this implies it's easier. Of course, we lose the personal contact, and you can also lose a bit of interest. But in that sense, for us, it has been positive. In terms of sectors, in terms of business opportunities, this has also meant that, as Rami was saying before, many corporates have discovered that this has to be on their agenda. This is not something we have to do, we will do in some years' time, or we will do next year. This is something we have to do now, because everything is so uncertain, everything can change so quickly that we have to be prepared. And our startups have also had to be prepared, or they have adapted their technological needs to the new needs of the companies. And in that sense, I would like to mention, as you may well imagine, that many businesses have developed to remote working conditions, to solve remote working conditions problems, the application for management of factories, for example, the maintenance and production and supply chain, and of course, everything related with healthcare. At the beginning, the short term, many of our big companies had to, start producing masks, start producing respirator parts. And nowadays, for the future, new solutions for diagnosis and virus analysis is becoming something that perhaps 10 months ago, we never thought it would be a business opportunity. No? So in that sense, I would also give, let's say, an optimistic view of what has happened this month and of what may imply for not only for our accelerator, but also for all the entrepreneurship system and ecosystem.
Thank you for that, Leila. And I think we're talking, I think the benefits of COVID that we see is kind of across the board. But then let's face it, let's put it on the table here, because everybody in this session and throughout who's ever listening without the summit knows this, that go-to-market time in this industry and Industry 4.0 takes a lot of time. It's a very hard uphill battle. It's not an easy sector. It's not cybersecurity. It's not fintech. It requires a lot of dedication of the startups, and it's an uphill battle. Startup Nation Central has been in this sector for almost now 3 years. And I can tell you as a person heavily involved in it, that it hasn't been easy, and for the startups as well. And yeah, I wanted to ask you, Dan, if you wouldn't mind starting, but what do you feel is the top tool that an I4 accelerator can give its startups? What is that magic thing or that extra thing that can push them forward?
Yeah, so I appreciate that. In a word, access, right? So access to business strategy, access to investment and funding, and more importantly, access to customers and strategic partners that can help them be successful. And I think Rami said it best. It's actually, I think what's interesting in Industry 4.0, it has created a sense of urgency for operational resiliency and manufacturing facilities. So the ability to operate lights out to some degree anyways, at some level of production when you run into a pandemic like this, or just any type of global supply chain disruption. So that's good. People are motivated. So these accelerators all offer direct access to manufacturers, right? And what's beautiful about this is our organizations have made and developed relationships, in some case with a singular manufacturer, or in some cases like Bind 4.0 and our organization, several manufacturing operations, right? We have big companies like Magna, Denso, Lear, Whirlpool, Bosch, Rexroth, Forcia, Siemens, Nippon Piston Rings. We work with all of their advanced manufacturing R&D people, all of their Industry 4.0 tech scouts, the people that are in charge of implementing these technologies and piloting them. So our programs offer that opportunity to provide direct access, trusted source, kind of help set up that first meeting, put these companies in a position where they actually have an opportunity to test and pilot their technology. Our accelerator here in North America is a little bit unique in that we not only offer the customers, but we offer the strategic partners. Because again, we're a global accelerator, right? So we're seeing applications from all over the world, from Europe, from Asia, South America, and certainly a lot from Israel, which is a hotbed for I4O technology. And as you know, these companies, whether a startup or a more mature firm, because we're a little bit unique in that we'll work not only with startups, but established firms, it doesn't matter if they're in Israel or any part of the world, why they want to do business in North America, they may not have operations, they may not have a representative, right? So we strategically set up corporate partners as a part of our I4O accelerator that are channel partners. And what I mean by that is they're a supply chain partner in the US, in Michigan, where we're located, that is a distributor of I4O and automation technologies. So we have companies like Electromatic, Cuttinger, and others that they represent automation and I4O technologies, right? They distribute them, they sell them. So they become a sales channel partner, which is just as important, in my opinion, to have in an accelerator to support companies worldwide, because it's not easy to just pick up and leave and set up operations all over the world. So we offer the opportunity to connect, set up those types of relationships with a company that's already here in the US or in Michigan in particular, represents these technologies no matter where they are in the world.
Rami, later, do you agree that the main point is really access, be it market, be it corporates? Is there other aspects that the accelerator brings forward?
I think first, Dan is spot on. Access is a key success factor here, and sure think this is super relevant and important. But I would add something else, and I think guidance and mentorship is super important as well, to make some shortcuts, because an entrepreneur, Israeli one, for example, maybe early stage, first time entrepreneur, and this guy or he or she, they are not very well aware of the way to approach these big guys. It's even if you get some, let's say, get them together with some kind of contact details of someone, introduction letter, whatever, then they need to continue. The mentor is making a lot of shortcuts for the entrepreneurs, both in access to some corporates and management, how to manage this startup, how to get things done much faster in the most important things first, prioritization, and how to approach this, let's say, channel partners and customers, etc. It's not an easy task for a first-time entrepreneur. A lot of hurdles in this way. And I think both the mentors and the team of the accelerator, with the orientation, the guidance, the support all over start with the sharpening the idea first, if it's very early. Later on with the process, I'm coming from the lean startup methodology, and we are trying to make it most efficient kind of process for the startup to go and find customers and have some kind of validation early on. So I think these two directions, access and guidance, orientation, mentorship, complement each other, and together they can enable the entrepreneur to get faster to the market and make it successful.
And I would actually agree with very much both. So, so what we have at Techstars is we're a mentor-driven organization. Thank you, Rami. We throw 80 to 100 mentors at every single company, and they are a mix of people who have startup experience. Exactly, hey, what do you do initially when you start the company, which has to do with operational expertise and how not to misstep and how to define your product and every aspect that you need in that early stage. And then the second piece is domain expertise, which is really what Dan and also Rami are touching upon, which is you can certainly talk to a lot of people once you've built a product, but to be able to have somebody mentor you and say, okay, here's your roadmap. Let's tweak it a little bit because this is really what's happening on that factory floor. This is really what the reality is for a large company that you want to sell to. This is where and how you need to intersect within the existing platform. Nobody here at this stage in the industry world is ever going to define a new platform. Every large company has an existing platform. So how do you intersect with that platform? You may bring platform capabilities, but you're not going to replace anything that a company the size of Stanley Black & Decker currently has. And so there's a very unique knowledge base, which I call domain expertise, which is both technical, but it's really use cases. It's the context for those use cases. You know, when you look at AI, people always talk about 95, 99% accuracy, but actually sometimes that's not good enough because in manufacturing, there's very few defects, particularly in automobile and other industries. So what is that defect element and how do you go after and how do you improve those efficiencies? So understanding domain expertise, use cases, data. If you're building ML models or doing anything with AI, you're absolutely going to need access to data. And within the manufacturing world, we're very siloed. Depending on where you are in the world, you might even not even use the web, you know, in terms of the cloud for your data because of GDPR kind of considerations. So there's a silo aspect that's beginning to change. Leaders in manufacturing understand the need for collaboration. Dan's group of companies absolutely shows that. What you're doing in Israel is a terrific example of that collaboration between startup companies and also the government. So there's a movement which is still at the early stages on this collaborative aspect. And so as accelerators, we can help that. And as accelerators, which have a deep domain expertise access to someplace like Stanley, but then also in my case with Techstars, which is a global organization, very much, you know, over 7,000 mentors that we have. Those are the kinds of things that really make a difference.
Mm-hmm. And Laila, Techstars, it is important to say that guidance, mentoring is very at its core for participants that don't know it. Techstars was actually the second acceleration program ever created in the world. So definitely part of something that's been around for a while. But I want to challenge you on that because Dan's first point was about access, right? There's lots of corporates, many different organizations you can tap into. And then Techstars, Stanley, has got one corporate at its core who is actually running this program, or shall I say, is the main corporate contact. What are the benefits, or what is the uniqueness about having this single corporate accelerator to join? What are the benefits there?
So I would say, I can talk about those benefits, but I would also say that we have cross-partner collaboration, right? So we do things like, you know, cross-industry vertical collaboration amongst multiple companies. So not only do I 90% of the time spend time with Stanley in terms of what they're looking for, but I also tap Cargill and, you know, Heritage Group and a whole host of other companies. So it's not just one in the case of a Techstars network, but we can talk more about that later. The real benefit is that you get very deep with a leader in the industry. So Stanley Black & Decker is a leader in the World Economic Forum on advanced manufacturing, on the future of work. They work very, very closely with what's happening in Washington, D.C. about manufacturing. They want to be a technology leader. If you look at their CTO, he's published a paper on a roadmap for AI in the next 10 years, and it looks at how do you integrate it. And so when they think collaboratively, they're actually reaching amongst their ecosystem, amongst players like 3M and others that they collaborate with on how technology should be brought to the factory floor. So the big companies who are collaborating are actually doing it similarly to what Dan's doing amongst themselves. And then they are trying to move the industry as a whole. And so when you tap into a company like Stanley that's making that leadership role, you're not just getting Stanley, you're getting their entire ecosystem. And that includes Rockwell, it includes a bunch of big names that are really all working together to sort of find the way to accelerate the adoption. You pointed out how hard it is for a startup to scale because you're not in fintech. You don't have an operating system that everyone runs the same way. Each factory is unique. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with legacy? How do we deal with the fact that, industries like the paper industry, average age of the equipment is 56 years. That's the average age. So we have a lot of legacy and we will always have a lot of legacy. And each factory runs a little bit differently with different products. So we have to find a way to think about technology a little bit differently. And I think that when you have leaders like Stanley working with others, then you have an opportunity to really understand what that means. And that domain expertise, running 120 factories, all of them at different stages of adoption of technology, that's incredibly insightful and helpful.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that insight, Laila. That was very interesting.
I would add one more thing to it. I'm sorry, I should have finished that. Stanley is also a company that is incredibly sophisticated on innovation. So when we talk about the accelerator, it's only one piece of what they do. They also have Stanley Ventures, which does follow on around financings. They have their own direction in terms of how they grow top line growth. They have Stanley X, which is kind of an amorphous studio model where they internally incubate, but they work with a lot of external companies, and again, looking to drive, in some cases, even disrupt themselves. And then they have innovation with each of the business units where there's people actively looking for innovation. So when you have an organization with multiple prongs of innovation, all of whom I work very closely with, you have places where companies that I see but may not want to take because I can only take 10, I can plug them in elsewhere. And so you have a much broader, more rich environment in terms of stage of company and the kind of interaction you have with companies that when you work with one company, you can actually tap into.
That's a very interesting observation, that that depth of understanding and readiness as well for Industry 4. I think there's a lot of readiness required from corporates in order to assimilate Industry 4 into their processes. Later, I wanted to touch with you on this point as well of corporates, because in Bind 4.0, you're working very much with the local corporates, industrial companies. What is the benefit? What are the pluses from working with these local corporates physically close to where the accelerator is sitting? Could you touch on that a little bit?
Well, I would say, first of all, we cannot forget that Bind is a private-public initiative. The Basque government is the one who put at the time this program in place, and we are the ones who manage the program, although we have this collaboration with the corporates. So being, let's say, not a public instrument, but being an instrument that is pushed or that is put in place by a government, this also allows us to be an instrument that is aligned with our public policies. So we work on the accelerator, on the program, we work on those sectors that we have defined as government that are the sectors of specialization of our industry. That allows us to give a certain coherence to our policies also in terms of implementation. This doesn't mean that everyone has to do or has to work on the two or three sectors that we have defined as priorities. Of course, we have many sectors being prioritized, but this allows us also a certain alignment with public policies. In terms of let's say more practical terms, no, we think that having multiple corporate acceleration gives great opportunities or gives bigger opportunities to our startups, because this means having more access and more, let's say, contracts, having the opportunity of having more contracts with different clients. The key of our program is that to be participant of our program, the corporates, they engage themselves to contract yearly at least one of the startups. And this first contract also doesn't mean that in the future they cannot develop contracts internally. In fact, many of the startups continue working with those corporates, no? But this allows the corporates at the first stage to have access to different opportunities in terms of possible clients. At the same time, it gives them opportunities of having access to different technologies, different processes, different sectors. And this means that they can also diversify in technology, because many times we speak about certain technologies, IA and so ever, but the application, as Laila was saying, has to be worked on that, and you have to see, the startup has to really see how the industry works. So this gives you the opportunity to specialize also more your technologies. Cross-industry applications also, because they have the opportunity of seeing more than one industry and even more than one technology that other startups are providing. And finally, I would say it is also a great opportunity for networking between corporates, because one of the things that we have discovered, this Basque country is a small country. We are only 2.2 million citizens. We have 7,000 square kilometers, so it's very easy we always say that we know almost each other. And it is true that in the big companies, the CEOs know each other because they are jointly in many fora, and but the innovation CEOs or the innovation responsibles, the digitalization responsibles, and so on, they don't know each other so much. And one of the discoveries of our program is that we have created, or the importance that these middle responsibles of companies, the networking that they have created between them. And this is something that is being also very, very positive and very highly appreciated in corporate companies as the ones we have in the Basque Country.
I think that's very interesting, Naida, because we have an expression here that we use as a co-petition, and really bringing the corporates together, and suddenly they're collaborating in an acceleration program, and they're bringing together their heads to actually advance this whole sector and working together to push things forward. And I think for me and my work in ecosystem development, I find that one of my greatest joys, because you're connecting between organizations that they're kind of, they eat each other out there in the world. But when it comes to innovation, they have to work together. And I want to touch on one point that you raised there, which had to do with this triangle that looks at government, industry, and the startups. And here, Lami, I think you'd have a lot of input, because I think you'll find this will resonate with you, because the Galilee Accelerator is built in that structure as well. We find the importance of that. Could you touch on that for a moment?
Yes, sure. Thank you. So first, we are a partnership of companies coming from the industrial space with governmental authorities, both the Israeli government and the local authorities here in the northern Israel, and NGOs. We are non-profit. We take nothing, no equity, no payment. We take nothing from the entrepreneurs in order to facilitate, to enable, and to have everyone that really has the skills, the passion, etc., the conditions to make it and get through it. And we have this concept of ecosystem. Actually, the ecosystem is made of not just the ones that I mentioned before, but first entrepreneurs in all kinds of stages. So more advanced and more advanced startups, mature startups, first-time entrepreneurs, of course, mentors, academics. Academia is included also in the accelerator. Actually, the accelerator was founded by an academic institution, the Earth Brody academic institution, which is coming from engineering. And we collaborate with all these bodies and others, and of course, a lot of industrial companies. And when I say industrial companies, we have each cohort of the accelerator. We have a lot of sessions where the startup team members are meeting one-on-one with executives of industrial companies. So let's say TDK, the CEO personally, TDK in Israel, is meeting personally with first-time entrepreneurs and devote a lot of time to this kind of sessions. The same goes with Flex, senior executives in Flex, Flextronics, and others, both Israeli and non-Israeli companies. And we are focusing a lot on multinational corporations where one leg is in Israel, but a lot of other legs are abroad. Israel is a very tiny market, you know. It's not comparable to the US or to Europe or anything like it. So Israelis are always looking to the world as for startups. And we use this multinational corporations. They have some kind of a leg in Israel, or maybe multiple legs in Israel, like Flex. They have few facilities in Israel. And by having success with this first in Israel, we can leverage it to the worldwide operation of Flex and others like it. So we see this ecosystem as an important element of the accelerator. Therefore, we are not just focusing on helping the entrepreneurs getting to some kind of corporate partners. Of course, this is the bread and butter. This is important, but also to facilitate operations or meetings and events of the ecosystem, which includes all these kind of bodies and the persons from all this ecosystem. And I think this is proving itself as very valuable for everyone, and first and foremost for the entrepreneurs.
Dan, you wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, I think for those that might be viewing this that have Industry 4.0 technologies and are looking at potentially getting involved in an accelerator, I think it's important to distinguish those that are economically development driven. So those that have public-private partnerships like our North America Industry 4.0 accelerator, and the reason being is a lot of accelerators that are driven by investment, they're only, one of the major interests are making an investment in the best companies, right? Which makes sense. And obviously nurturing those companies. So they may take, 100 plus applications and only accept 5 or 10 companies and then only work with those 5 or 10 companies, where like Bind 4.0 and Rami's organization and our own are really looking for as many good technologies as we can possibly get, right? Because we're driven to try to drive those into our regions, to get those technologies used by our local manufacturers, or in the case of Rami, actually trying to, find pathways from I4O technologies to other parts of the world, right? So that we have economically driven metrics that are not about investment, right? They're about job growth and technology development, IP creation, exporting business and technology, right? So I think that's, what you're going to get is maybe a different approach, right? So we can work with not only startups for that reason, but we can work with established firms that maybe have traction in Europe, but have not necessarily been able to grow their business in North America. They don't have to be a startup, right? They just have to have really good technology that our corporate manufacturers are going to find appealing. So, one size doesn't fit all when it comes to accelerators. Some provide different opportunities for those directly seeking investment. We have a seed fund too, right? But that's not our main purpose, is to make investment. Our main purpose is to find the best technologies and get our manufacturers using them.
I'm going to jump in there. I have to, because it sounds like I'm the only economic one here. But so I would say that I agree with everything that's been said. Like, there's multiple stages of companies, and certainly asking a later stage company to give up equity is not going to happen. And so you're by virtue, you're going to kind of limit your access to some of the economic development capabilities, both whether it's from Rami's perspective or from Dan's perspective, and Lara as well. But I would also say that when you're in the seed stage, or even when you're later stage, and I talk about this from my perspective, both at Intel Capital and also now at Stanley, is that when you have economic motivators, the alignment is higher. And so you might not immediately walk away. So this notion of mentorship, you are more committed to mentor, more senior executives will mentor, and therefore you increase the probability that mentorship will actually have a bigger impact. Why? Because there's an economic motivator. That means I'm going to open my Rolodex, just open a little bit more. Now, Techstars' view is all mentors should do it without the economic motivation, but there's an economic motivation long-term. And one of the challenges in any organization where there is no economic motivation, and this is really the dilemma that every single corporation goes into when they think of venture capital or acceleration or studio models, is they first have to decide, what are the economics of it? And that's a path that when you go one way or the other, you're going to drive certain kind of behaviors. And it's extremely difficult once you've made that decision to kind of continue to build that ecosystem, continue to understand the different stages of companies you engage with. But if you're smart longer term, you recognize that, even though you have an economic motivator to use the best out of that, which is commitment, long-term commitment for every party. But you also recognize that if you don't develop the ecosystem, if you don't have a way to take a later stage company without asking them for, say, 6% or whatever it is the early seed stage accelerator wants, then long term, you're not going to attract the best seed stage companies. And so I would argue that even the economically driven guys recognize that without the ecosystem development, without the opportunity to think about different stages of companies, you're going to end up minimizing the kind of companies that want to work with you and even give you that economic participation in their equity. So yes, there's definitely a polarization that happens, but I would argue the people who are more sophisticated recognize that you have to balance it. And so again, just to give an example of the 10 companies, the companies I'm talking to about mine, we've already started to talk to them about specific pilots before they even come into the program. And so that's economically driven because you can reach deep into those organizations. Those organizations recognize that when they choose somebody, they also have that economic incentive at the back of it. So those are all very important.
And I really like how we all mentioned the words co-petition, we mentioned collaboration, we mentioned ecosystem development, working together, et cetera, et cetera. And each one of you has got its strengths in its area and in its focus. But then I wanted to ask all of you, is there room for a cooperation between various accelerators in various places in the world? Is there a place for collaboration? And Lila, I'd like to start with you because you're part of a huge network.
Yes.
But then within that network, you're quite singular because you're the only one that's dealing with Industry 4.0, which for many of them is probably a topic which is very foreign. How does that work?
Sure, and just to give some context, Techstars is a 14-year-old network of accelerators. We run 45 to 50 accelerators worldwide. We're in 22 countries all the world. Because we've been around 14 years, we have a portfolio of 2,200 companies. So when you look at the math, that alone will give you the breadth of kind of engagement. And I would say that what we have is, we have two types of accelerators. One is a city accelerator, which is just driven geographically. And then we have these corporate partnerships. In my case with Stanley Black & Decker, I also have a colleague who works with Cargill. And you may initially say, okay, we're the only Industry 4.0, but let me give you the example of Cargill. Guess what? They do manufacturing and they also have Industry 4.0 deals that come through that accelerator by virtue of it. But is it 10 of them? No, it's not 10 of them. Probably it's 1 or 2 a year that's in manufacturing. We have a company that also works with just purely AI. And AI means that most of their solutions are, their accelerators mostly attracting software companies, but every 1 or 2 a year is an Industry 4.0. And so one of the beauties of that kind of network is that when they look at that Industry 4.0 company, they call me first for just due diligence. And secondly, when that company wants to engage with somebody like Stanley. And so the network does a little bit of everything. And so there's an opportunity there to sort of be cross-collaborative globally. So again, we source globally. And when I go out and ask my colleagues, have you seen companies in the space? I will get a response from Singapore and India and Berlin and London. And that network is very, very collaborative. And so the benefit of being global, both on the Techstars side, which is the seed stage side, and being global from Stanley Black & Decker, that is 120 factories worldwide, gives a pretty unique opportunity to work together.
Mm-hmm. Dan, Rami, Lere, is there room for collaboration and cooperation between various accelerators in I4? Is there room for all of you guys to work together? Could you touch on that?
I believe so. I mean, we're already collaborating with Layla and the Stanley Black & Decker accelerator and making sure those that apply for our accelerator are knowledgeable and have the option to also apply for theirs. We've made the same arrangements recently with Bind 4.0. Again, because I think the end initiative is really to help these companies be successful, not just with our own corporate partners, but in our own respective regions, right? So if a company goes through the Bind 4.0 program, for instance, in Spain, and is successful, but then really doesn't have a foothold in North America, it really benefits their organization to have them also go through, the Black & Decker accelerator that Labor runs, or our accelerator, right? So especially, if we're, for the accelerators are making investments in companies, right? It offers them an opportunity for growth in different parts of the world. We all have our own unique connections to customers and strategic partners and those in the supply chain. We all have, in some cases, very different networks of investors and funding options. So I think it only benefits us to not be territorial, but to actually be very collaborative.
Mm-hmm. Lera, do you want to touch on that? Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, Michal. I must say that after listening to Laila and to Dan, our Bind is very young. This is our fifth edition, so we don't have much experience on international issues, but we don't really have an international strategy. And as you have said, my background is quite international, so I know how difficult it is. and how much time and resources you have to invest to develop relationships. So this is definitely something that we are going to approach in the coming. We are now on a process of a new strategy for buying for the coming years. After 5 years, we want to think and we want to see how we can improve, and we will definitely approach the international issue, because we think collaboration, we think networking, cooperation, to start with, it will allow us to learn more about others. It will allow us to identify synergies, and it will also be beneficial for our startups and for even for our corporates. No, so I think that it's definitely an opportunity. But I want to put on top of the table an issue that is perhaps something because it's something that is coming on the table when we are in this process of thinking what we want to be in the future, is that from a public perspective, there is always this question or this thing that comes that, okay, if we go international and we go to Israel and we collaborate with Israel, with the United States and whatever, and we bring startups from Israel, we manage to bring startups from Israel, from wherever, they will have to, in our case, they will have to become Basque. They will have to open an office in the Basque country, or the same with corporates. No, so this is something that in the public, from a public perspective, is something that, in my personal opinion, because I have this international background, I think this is a barrier many times that public institutions close a bit their opportunities, because they always think that they are obliged, more obliged with their companies, no? The companies that are from this, as Dan was saying, this territorial issue or territorial view. And I think that in this business, in the startup business, we have to forget a little bit about these barriers and these territories and become more global, even if that sometimes means, from the public perspective, means, well, having to renounce to certain things that for us are really imperative. No, this is
though I don't see a problem in opening an office in Basque Country. It's a beautiful area with beautiful beaches. So if I were a startup, I would not say no to that.
All my colleagues would be delighted then.
I think it's a great opportunity. So thanks for touching on that later. Rami, from your point of view, global collaborations with other accelerators, could you just touch on that? We don't have much time, but I'd love to hear your opinion there.
Yeah, I'll make it short. I think this is very important. This is possible. First, it's possible to collaborate, and I think it's a win-win situation. And we should think creatively about the engagement opportunities. How can we, collaborate? For example, I'm very familiar with some other accelerator programs, not in our domain of industry, that, for example, start in Israel for a few months. Some companies, some startup companies start in Israel for a few months and then go to the US, continue there, and meet other entrepreneurs, other communities, ecosystems, and industrial companies, or in our case, industrial companies. So I think the exposure to different entrepreneurs coming from global spaces from all over the world can help, because you can learn a lot when you discuss with other mindset entrepreneurs, taking into account different kind of approaches, etc. From our point of view, we are looking forward to cooperate. Both, for example, let me give you another direction. Our program is early stage, so it's not a very mature kind of startup. It's starting from even idea, or starting with a product with before customers, and we are making the first steps with the entrepreneurs. But how to get into the more advanced situation where you collaborate with these big guys? Yeah, we said before, in Israel there are some opportunities, but abroad in the US and in Europe, much bigger opportunities, and we can think of multiple kind of engagement opportunities, investments, and other corporations.
That's great. Thanks for that, Rami. And I think what for me is fantastic, and part of the message here to the startups is that there is a support network. There's a support network to get forward. There's a support network for Industry 4.0 in all sorts of places in the world, no matter what maturity level you're at. And rather than a lot of startups kind of trying to do it by themselves and kind of running the run and then thinking that they're actually paving a path, there's a lot of ways to do this in a really educated, mature way where you can be supported. And I think that's one of the key reasons why I really love this session and wanted to take this forward and invite you to it, because that message is important for startups. It's don't start blind. You know, there's people have done it before, and use these tools. There's tools out there, use them. And it really shortens the time to market and gives you great access to some great corporates. And the know-how. This peer learning is fantastic. So now for the last part of our session, all of your startups and your accelerators usually do a demo day, or they have time on stage and they have to pitch their startup. So we're going to reverse the roles now. I'm going to give each one of you about 60 seconds to pitch your accelerator, talk about it, tell the Israeli startups what it's all about and who you're looking for. And I'll give you each one the stage to do your pitch, and then we'll conclude after that. So who's up first?
I can go if you want.
Okay, go Dan. There
So
you're
again,
up.
Dan Redondo with Centropolis. We partner with Automation Alley and Lean Rocket Lab, two other organizations here to run this Industry 4.0 accelerator in North America, based out of Michigan primarily, but we have corporate partners that are global, as I mentioned, 30 different corporate partners. I mentioned some of them: Magna, Denso, Lear, Whirlpool, Bosch, Rexroth, Faurecia, Siemens, and others. And again, we're very economic development driven, right? So we're trying to find the best in class I4O technologies and draw them into Michigan to partner with Michigan manufacturers. Obviously, there's a significant bench strength in our capabilities to help, connect these new technologies into Michigan operations, because we have over 10,000 manufacturers here. We do not have a formal application process that's only like once or twice a year, like some accelerators. We have rolling applications. We'll take applications at any time. Like I said, we're not cohort based, so we don't only take 10 or so many companies per year. We vet as we go, and if it's a good company and a good technology, we will pipeline them into our corporate partners. There's no requirement for investment. We do have a $1.3 million seed fund for startups if they do want investment and are seeking and raising money. And we've made a number of investments so far. And we do have a couple of times a year, we have a big pitch event, though. I wouldn't call it a demo day, but we do feature kind of the best in class companies. Like we featured 10 best in class I4O and manufacturing tech companies on October 2nd, gave out a bunch of awards, including cash prizes. So thanks for having us and allowing us to tell our story.
Thanks, Dan, for Centropolis. Lene, do you want to tell us 60 seconds about Buying 4.0?
Yes, I'm a politician. This is not easy for me. So I'll try to be very brief. First of all, the Basque Country is one of the strongest industrial ecosystem of Europe. 25% of our GDP comes from industry. So if you're interested in Industry 4.0, 4.0, I think that we are the region, we are a place where you should look at. On the other hand, as I was saying, this is a public-private acceleration program. So you have the government, the public institutions that are very much involved and that can help you to all these bureaucratic and logistics issues that many times startups have not got to concentrate on that. And on the other hand, you will have access and to 60 industrial companies, industrial corporates that will give you or that are obliged to contract you if your technologies are interesting and if you can solve their problems. And finally, I will end up with some figures. We are, as I said before, quite young. This is our 5th edition, but in 4 editions, we have had more than 100 startups have been accelerated, more than 170 projects developed, and more than 5 million euros turnover on the whole. So I think that we may have, or that we will have a great future, and I hope to receive Israel startups soon, because to end up, we love eating and drinking. So we would be delighted to have you there.
Israeli startups can definitely associate with that.
Lila. I'll be very quick. Techstars is a 14-year-old company. We gave up to $120,000 for the companies that come into our accelerator. It's a 13-week program, in person usually, although virtually right now. Out of the 14 years that we've done this, we have had 11 unicorns. Those companies, our companies in our portfolio have raised over $10 billion in equity, and only about 56% of them go the traditional venture capital route. Others have raised non-dilutive equity. We have over 70 corporate partners worldwide. We're in 22 countries worldwide, and we have a network where you can plug into, as I said earlier, both in terms of Stanley Black & Decker for Industry 4.0, but also in other areas in terms of tapping into ag tech and IoT and AI all over the world. So please consider us. Techstars.com is a terrific way to figure out all of our reach.
And last but not least, our very own Rami, which is just an hour away from me.
Yeah. So the Galilee Accelerator for Smart Industry is the only classical accelerator specializing in Industry 4 in Israel. So yes, we are local, and I think the startup nation has its own temper, its own attributes and community. And I think community of entrepreneurs and others, as I said before, super important, and that's what we do. Our mentors, we have dozens of mentors, very strong ones, coming from passion, coming from experience as entrepreneurs or industrial executives, and they really put their heart and soul into supporting these young entrepreneurs, and this is proving itself very successful. Now we have a very kind of an holistic approach to the journey of the startups, starting with wave one. Each year we have 2 waves. Wave one is for very early stage. Maybe you have just an idea, just some technology, something very early. And stage 2, which is wave 2, which is a bit more advanced, already have the first customers, of course, the MVP, etc. So we cover both sides, and mentorship, access, as said before, we have access for the multinational corporations and personal connections on this one, and even for investments. Today we have the I4 Valley Incubator, which invests in startups, working together with the accelerators and an ecosystem of investors in Israel, all over the world coming to Israel, some scouters, investors, etc., as you very well know, to invest in Israeli startups, and they have a lot of good opportunities over here.
Rami, thank you very much. And everybody on this call is actually also on our networking zone and the Summit website. So please feel free to connect to them, send them an email, connect, ask to speak to them, chat to them. Dan, Laila, Lede, Rami, it's been a great honor to have you with me today in this discussion. You all have each other's emails as well, so great networking too amongst our accelerators. We have 1 minute just to let everybody know that the next sessions are up in about 2 minutes. We have a roundtable about digitalization of process manufacturing and the MAI, Industry 4 Applications for Israeli Industry, which are 2 roundtables running right after us. So feel free to stay connected and join this next roundtable. Once again, great honor to have you all here with me. And I think our main mission altogether is putting I4 on the map and continue your wonderful work. So thanks everybody, and last year at Startup Nation Central.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.